Joining me now live in our Lagos studio to discuss this forecast from the federal government and much more, I have Mukhtar Mohammed, the Chief Executive Officer of Finance with Mukhtar. Good to have you on the breakfast show this morning.
Good morning, David.
Well, it's quite cheering news to see such optimism from the part of the federal government. Yes, the global economy is gradually navigating through the COVID-19 pandemic. We are all looking at the most strategic plans to ensure that we have the economy bounce back. But let's take a look at the current state of the economy. Nigeria's inflation reports, weak trading of the naira, dwindling external reserves, poor foreign direct investment, and somewhat a whole lot just to look at versus the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think this projection for next year to 2024 is a little too ambitious?
Very, very ambitious. Very, very ambitious. And it's good to be ambitious, but then you need to put structure on ground so that they say sometimes you aim for the sky, and then you might not get to the sky.
Aim for the sun so that in case you fall on the sky.
But this time around, we are aiming so high that, but we're not putting the structures behind what we're doing. You just pointed out a lot of things that are not going well for us. Well, those are the things that we're supposed to look at on how to turn around those numbers, especially foreign direct investment, whether portfolio or foreign. It's not coming. Exchange rate volatility is still high. We are only looking at the government-owned side of 410. We are not looking at the parallel market, which seems to be where over almost 80% of Nigerians patronize. Because if you look at some 2-3 years ago, before the invasion of the pandemic, the exchange rate between the parallel market and what you even get in the import-export window via the bank exchanges was almost the same, 360 to 360.
Mr. Mukhtar, if I may just button here, these are just assumptions, possible outcomes. But what do you think might have been the premise here for the Minister of Finance to say this is the likely outcome?
Without doubting, I think oil. They are looking at the price of oil. You see, Nigeria goes to recession when oil goes down. Nigeria comes out of recession when oil price goes up. Now we're seeing oil prices moving, but then we are not even going to benefit from those movements because of our subsidy payment, which is one understanding that the government is not even looking at. The Minister of Finance is not addressing that. You have revenue shortfall, you have debt, and again, look at it. She said it there now that there will be an upward review of the exchange rate from 379 to 410, and that review now means that there's an upward review in our debt profile also, mostly debt that are domiciliary in dollar. So we have those challenges. Those are what the government should be looking at. We need to see structure. It's not about growing the GDP. GDP growth without unemployment growth high and GDP growth high and unemployment growth high. It doesn't count for anything. GDP growth that does not come from the bottom up does not count for anything. GDP growth, we want to say GDP growth that is based on productivity. How much the Nigeria have been able to contribute to the GDP to bring it to the level. Not based on output in terms of crude oil benchmark, crude oil production, import of from agricultural product outside the shore of this country. That's not what we want to see. We want to see ver and vi. We said, okay, crude oil growth, based on the GDP growth, we'll be able to get employment for about the social Nigerian numbers of Nigerian youth are now employed, not unemployed. Most underemployed are now well employed. So we need to begin to look at those figures to get our GDP growth, not based on output, input, production.
Let's now talk about borrowing. Now, borrowing for so many comes with mixed feelings. Now, borrowing is not necessarily a bad resolution to support the infrastructure development that is needed to also have a well-grounded GDP growth rate. But with our current debt levels, which the government still says is not at the threshold of raising too much of concern, but we also have to have concerns around repayment of loans. Nigeria is not generating as much. So the question of how do we redeem our integrity and also pay back these loans is under concern. Transparency in our budget estimates for capital projects to provide power, good roads, sound business climate, and much more. Those are also conversations that are ruling at this point in time, looking at budget implementation, the performance from last year to this year, and much more. But how do we now shift this narrative? To support this type of forecast, we need a change in the ratio of capital and recurrent budget estimates, the expenditure. But in the last decade, we've not tilted by any means from that ratio, from that structure. And that limits any growth trajectory. So how do we now begin to shift or change this narrative?
If we have the presidents that have the political will to do it, then we'll shift the narrative. Because what we see is that we see the president come in. Let me use the nomenclature we have in the presidency now. We have two special advisors. One senior special advisor, another special advisor. That is recurrent expenditure. We are not looking at reducing political appointees. This is the challenge that has to do with recurrent expenditure. We have so much political appointees, and they are the ones that take the highest chunk of those recurrent expenditure in terms of allowance, in terms of salary, because some of them are not under the federal, the benchmark of the federal government type of salary structure. They have to be arranged by whoever appointed them.
I make mention of transparency, looking at the fact that Budget came up with a report saying that, well, there are over 300 capital projects that were repeated from last year and then coming to this year. That's also an agenda. Whether this is true or not, investigations have to be carried out further beyond this report. But if we have such information at the back of our heads, then that brings to the fore, how do we deal with such replications? Because we cannot afford to waste money at this point.
David, it is true, because sometimes you see those numbers coming and the federal government is not saying anything about it. If the budget have done such numbers and the federal government thinks they have contrary, they should come up with it. I've complained here, I've said it once here, whereby here in Nigeria, you see local government projects being expected to be done by federal government and they put it via and those are the challenges that we're talking about. We need to know that this is a federal project. This is not because I'm the Speaker of the House of Representatives or I'm a leader in the House of, I want to show my people that I was able to bring a federal project. I was able to bring a project to that place. So even when the project is supposed to be a local government project, I turn it to become a federal project. And they do those projects and put my name, they put my picture there. This project was facilitated by Honorable that and that. Those are the challenges because there's no transparency. Everybody is thinking of my name, not the Nigerian country in context. Okay. But what was I able to bring to my people when I was a senator, when I was a member of when I was a member of the House of Representatives, when I was a governor, or when I was a minister? Was I able to bring projects to my people? Those are the challenges.
I would like to ask two questions and one now. Also looking at the policy agenda of the federal government at this point in time, it's quite also difficult to generate revenue. But looking at the fact that we have emergent sectors of the economy, our fixation on oil is one that we can continue to lament about, but the reality is that we need to shift our focus to agriculture, the likes of ICT, and even have conversations around digital currencies. How do we now begin to have frameworks, policy frameworks that support emerging economies and then also drive that aggressive investment that would be able to have us have the GDP bounce back and record such wins? And then the second question is also looking at the fact that we also have security still a major concern. What do you expect from state governments in terms of revenue generation strategies and the one product, one state initiative? We're still waiting for the
one product, one state. Let me start from the second one. One product, one state can have. There's no state in Nigeria that cannot generate a particular product. I can tell you. So what we need to do, but they will tell you that there are someone we have in the exclusive list, which has the federal government has. So we have to go back to the constitution to begin to review that. If you look at the internal generated revenue, the only state that have been able to do that is Lagos State, and this time around we are seeing Ogun State trying to do that. But even when you look at states like Delta State, you look at states like Rivers State, you look at states like Bayelsa State that seems to collect the draft of the allocation for the federal government, they don't seem to drive internal generated revenue. So those are big challenges, and you need to have the political will to go after people to pay their tax. You need to have the political will to be able to pay in projects to tell the person they're there. What we see is that local government in some of those states tend to generate illegal charges to get more revenue for themselves.
And policy framework for
but when you look at policy of the new sector of the economy, it has to do with infrastructure. You don't, especially the greatest growth of any economy is the service sector.
Take cryptocurrency, for example.
When you come to crypto, it has to do with infrastructure. And again, crypto has its own challenges, which has to do with security, cyber security. How much are we ready for that?
Okay. Well, Dr. Mukhtar Mohammed, we'll just have to draw the curtains on this conversation. It's a very big one, and then we'll definitely still come back to this. And then at the end of the day, these are assumptions that would still have to be adjusted either to smaller margins to bigger margins, depending on how the pendulum swings. By the end of the day, all of this is also premised on the security of the country.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show this morning.